Getting dialogue right is honestly more complicated than a lot of other things in storytelling. At the same time, it's also pretty easy to say what makes good dialogue. I could pretty much end this video right now by telling you that if you can guess who's saying what in your story without the use of dialogue tags, then you've written what is, at the very least, functional dialogue. But, of course, it's not always that simple. We can start by considering dialogue tags, for example. Should you use them? A lot of people will tell you that dialogue tags should be used sparingly and in the most simplistic manner possible. As in, he said, she said, and not much else. Now, I'm not an extremist. I will sometimes let a he demanded or she stated slip through. Like with most things, the problem isn't so much using unique dialogue tags, but overusing them. I'm sure at least once in your life you must have read something where each line of dialogue was tagged differently. Where instead of he said, it's he snapped, she declared, he stated, she intoned, he cried, she insisted. That's not good. That's never good. The reason it's bad is because you should be able to tell what state of mind the character is in and what tone they're taking by what they're saying. If a character is demanding something, then it's obvious from what they're saying that it's a demand. You don't need to add, they demanded. Likewise, if two characters are arguing, you don't need to add an exclamation mark where he yelled, she yelled after every single line of dialogue. Every reader has an idea of what an argument sounds like and looks like. Besides, the reader should know what your characters would react like in this situation because they've known your characters for potentially hundreds of pages by now. But listen, just because you've used a lot of dialogue tags or you still have an instinct to use them doesn't mean you're a bad writer. I think it's more indicative of a person wanting to have a lot of control over how the reader is visualizing what's happening. And that's only natural. In some cases you might have repeated the scene in your mind like 100,000 times, so of course you want to be particular about the way you describe it and add as much detail as possible. But the thing is, you will never have that level of control over how the reader visualizes things, so you just need to let go. Because at best, this will just lead to stilted writing, but at worst, it will annoy the reader enough to want to put down your book. Having all these different dialogue tags doesn't add the level of detail you think it does. People will just ignore them and imagine whatever they want to in their heads. So it's really just jarring and distracting. If I've known a character for 20 chapters, I don't need to hear that they said something jokingly. I can infer that they said it jokingly by what they said and having known them for this long. Basically, you need to stop relying on dialogue tags as a way to add detail to your story and think of them instead in the same way you do about punctuation. I know that if you look at your dialogue and it's just Mary said, John said, Mary said, John said, you might think this is repetitive, people will hate this. The truth is, however, that it's so unintrusive that most readers will never notice it. Thinking that using said gets repetitive is no different than thinking using periods gets repetitive. Would you randomly use an ellipsis in a paragraph because you've already used 3 periods and need to change it up? Of course not. Likewise, you should only be using a unique dialogue tag if the situation really requires it. If your character is traipsing through the woods, for example, and she's suddenly addressed by an unfamiliar voice, using a dialogue tag to explain the way in which that line is said might be helpful, since you've never really met this unfamiliar figure and have no expectations. When using dialogue tags, you always want to think about functionality first and foremost. Again, they're not there for you to set the mood or break down exactly how the characters sound and act. If that's what you want, then you have all the space preceding the dialogue to establish precisely that. Or, alternatively, you could even pause the dialogue and explain how people are feeling and reacting to what's going on. But what you don't want to have is 5 pages of pure dialogue in which you only rely on dialogue tags to explain what's going on. With dialogue tags, less is always more. If you have a conversation going on between 5 characters, for example, then yes, using dialogue tags to indicate who's saying what might make it a lot easier for the reader to just keep up and keep reading. But if it's just a conversation between 2 characters, then using a dialogue tag once to explain who spoke first is more than enough, especially for a brief dialogue, since naturally readers will assume that the 2 take turns. But it goes without saying, what we said at the beginning still stands. Ideally, in a well-written story, especially one that isn't aiming for realism, which might purposely have characters sounding off or imitating one another, then who is speaking should be obvious by what they're saying. Even on a plot level, if we leave aside the characters' distinct personalities. If character A is a vampire hunter, Alice, and character B is the vampire's lover who wants to protect him, Christine, you shouldn't have to use Alice said and Christine said every other line. Who's who should be clear from the lines because the dialogue should reflect their drives and their objectives. If your dialogue is so directionless that a reader really can't tell who's speaking from what's being said, you might have a big problem. The main purpose of dialogue, like everything else, is to further and deepen your story. Yes, sometimes dialogue can just be used to give some breathing room and for haha jokes, but generally, 90% of your dialogue should have an actual purpose. People are talking because they want to get things, because they want to further their objectives. So, situationally, it should always be obvious who's saying what. Lastly, you want to look at style. Depending on where characters come from and their personality, they're going to employ very different vocabulary and follow very particular speech patterns. An easy and kind of lazy way to do this is to have a character always make use of a particular word or catchphrase, or, because they're religious, they might always make reference to the Bible. That is one way to do it, but again, I do think that's kind of lazy. I would suggest instead that you focus on the details. How long are their responses generally? Are they big talkers or are they very laconic? Do they speak grammatically correct? Are they formal or informal? Are they explicit? Do they make allusions to anything in particular? Are their emotional responses veiled, or do they put everything up front? How do they frame issues related to them, and then how do they frame issues related to others? There's just so many things you can consider, honestly. A reliable way to test if you've done this successfully is to take a line and then try to give it to another character. Because either the content or the style of the line should be a dead giveaway that it doesn't fit whoever else you picked for it. And, yes, it goes without saying that a lot of this is artificial. In real life, you might have people speak very differently depending on their mood, or even because they met someone else they like whose speech patterns they're not copying. Real life is very complex, which is why storytelling is very simple and requires a level of artificiality. Again, if you're writing literature, that's one thing. But if you're writing commercial fiction, your writing needs to be clear and easy to digest by the vast majority of readers. The good news is that because of AI, there's some easy ways to practice this now. Just go to ChatGPT or Bard or Bing or whatever, pick a line, and then tell it to rewrite it in the style of a character you like and see what changes. In fact, you can even ask it to explain why it changed things in a certain way. Here's one example using the Roy siblings from Succession. I gave ChatGPT the original sentence, "I'm considering taking a vacation to relax and clear my mind. It's been a hectic month and I could use some time off to unwind and recharge." And then I told ChatGPT to rewrite it in the style of each. Roman. You know what? Fuck it. I'm seriously thinking about taking a damn vacation to chill the hell out and get my mind off things. This past month has been a total shit show and I need some fucking time off to decompress and get back in the game. Now we have Kendall. I've been contemplating the idea of taking a vacation to find some relaxation and mental clarity. This month has been extremely busy and I feel the need to step away and rejuvenate. Shiv. I'm giving some thought to taking a vacation to seek relaxation and clear my mind. It's been a rather hectic month and a bit of time off would allow me to unwind and recharge. I also asked ChatGPT to tell me a little bit about each of their styles and how it went about doing this. For Roman, he said that he uses casual, explicit language and can be quite blunt in his speech. For Kendall, he said Kendall speaks with precision and often uses sophisticated vocabulary. He maintains a level of control in his speech and avoids explicit language. As for Shiv, he said she speaks eloquently and politely, using refined language. She is composed and articulate in her expressions. Let's give one final example, okay? Original sentence. I'm thinking of throwing a party at my place, and I don't really want a huge crowd. Just some close friends and a chill atmosphere. I'm not in the mood for a wild night. Roman. I'm fucking contemplating throwing a party bash at my joint, and I gotta say, I'm not looking for a fucking mob scene. Just some tight-knit buddies, keeping it easy going. Wild nights? Nah, not on my agenda right now. Kendall. I'm considering hosting a gathering at my place. I'm not keen on a massive turnout. Only close friends, aiming for a relaxed vibe. Not really feeling up for a crazy night. Shiv. I'm thinking about having a small get-together at my home, and I'd prefer it to be an intimate affair. Just a few close friends, creating a laid-back atmosphere. Wild partying isn't exactly what I'm in the mood for tonight. While the AI is not flawless, and I'm sure each of these examples could be much better, this does show off the fact that it's pretty easy to practice with this. And getting a good idea of how this stuff works is going to be invaluable regardless of what type of story you want to write and what sort of characters. In conclusion, try to use dialogue text sparingly, and make sure your dialogue is reflective not only of your characters' personalities, but their drives.